Unionized baristas walked out of the job Thursday at Starbucks locations around the country as part of what's being called the Red Cup strike. Workers are hoping to pressure the coffee giant into negotiating contracts with the unionized stores, including the one along Perryville Road in Rockford. However, Starbucks say despite escalating rhetoric and recurring rallies demanding contracts, the union representing the baristas hasn't agreed to progress contract bargaining in more than 5 months.
Ideally, we would like Starbucks to pay attention and realize that we're kind of serious about it and we're hitting them where it hurts, which is the profits. And we would really like a contract at the end of the day. We would like them to sit down with us and actually deal with the problem that they've caused.